Hi, I'm Leiser from the Global Learning Council, and I will present just a few of the key findings from a study that we conducted called Mapping the New Normal for Higher Education. We conducted this study together with the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society, and we wanted to focus on what would emerge from the global adoption of digital learning, especially in terms of long-term effects for digital learning and what this would mean for more equitable access to higher ed. So we recruited 85 respondents from all around the world, higher education leadership, and persons who work at intermediary organizations. The survey used mixed methods. We had a lot of open questions to really allow respondents to share their perspectives, and we followed up with in-depth interviews. So the findings that I present to you today come from these first two phases of data collection. So first, we asked respondents about the challenges that institutions were facing, and they indicated that the main challenge in response to the pandemic was by far a lack of expertise among instructors. Some of the other challenges were lack of digital infrastructure and technical resources, difficulties in students having access to a suitable learning environment at home, and the questions, how do you build communities and create social learning experiences via digital technologies? Then we asked how institutions responded to these challenges, and we found that there were short-term responses, such as providing IT support to students and instructors, allowing instructors to design their classes as they saw fit, and ensuring the well-being of everybody at the university. When reflecting on digital learning in the long run, respondents emphasized that hybrid teaching modalities would be really relevant to them in the future. They also talked a lot about navigating a digital divide more systematically and about rethinking learning outcomes. And underlying these responses, there were larger questions that had to do with the entire higher education environment and the way that education is seen and is developing. So we found that there really is not one solution for digital learning, but a lot of different building blocks that come together and larger culture shifts that have to take place in the higher education sector. So some of the topics were, for example, what is the role and what is the responsibility of higher education institutions in providing a learning infrastructure beyond the campus? How do you redefine learning outcomes and then also assess the quality of the learning and the teaching that is taking place? And how do you navigate all these changes in a really competitive environment? And in terms of long-term effects, we found that before the pandemic, there were two approaches to digital learning. So you had remote education and distance education, and on the other hand, you had digital learning sort of as an add-on to in-person teaching, in-class teaching. Then during the emergency response, all of a sudden, the goal of digital learning was to provide for a huge number of students. So all of a sudden, the quantity was important. And now if we move toward a long-term strategy, we can think about combining the goals of these different approaches. So providing access as the main goal of remote education, really geared at non-traditional learners, enhancing the quality of teaching that we know about active classrooms, really using tools to enhance and improve the learning experience that takes place. And we also know that we can take all the digital teaching online. The emergency response of the pandemic showed that this is possible. So ultimately, I think we kind of have all the elements, all the tools necessary to build an approach that creates accessible, high quality, engaging learning at scale. What do we need to get there? We identified three aspects. We need global collaboration because everybody is working in this very competitive environment, but we can share resources and design collaborative learning experiences to make higher education better for all. We need a true commitment to equitable access. This means thinking about and possibly redefining the role of higher education institutions beyond campus and equipping students with additional tools and techniques to learn in different environments. And lastly, we need to think about data-driven approaches to digital teaching and learning. We can think about what we already know. We already know a lot from learning science. But we can also think about using technology to improve learning outcomes, for example, artificial intelligence. And we can build on the experiential knowledge of instructors who now have an entire virtual semester under their belt. We looked forward to discussing this further with you, and now I will hand over to Dagmar Willems, who will present some findings and discuss a few initiatives that the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, has brought underway in the past months.
Welcome. I'm Dagmar Willems, Senior Desk Officer in the Section Digitalisation at DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service. DAAD is the world's largest funding organization for the international exchange of students and researchers. Thank you for the opportunity to share some data we gathered and observations we made over the past first months of the COVID-19 pandemic. When the COVID-19 pandemic started to unfold, it disrupted the world and also impacted the international higher education sector. International student mobility was severely affected, particularly due to the closure of many university campuses and to international travel restrictions. Reviewing student mobility numbers in the Erasmus program in spring and summer 2020, it shows not too dark a picture. More than 3/4 of students have continued their studies. This includes digital continuations. 50% of them continued to stay in the host country. Around 2/3 of the interns were able to carry out their stay using digital instruments. These findings point towards the important role digital formats and tools play in keeping higher education and international academic exchange going in situations of high uncertainty. DAAD quickly responded to this by adding 2 new puzzle pieces to its funding portfolio. We established 2 programs to support universities in facing the challenge to dynamically expand their capabilities in the fields of digital learning and working. With the program International Virtual Academic Collaboration, the DAAD provides practical support to instructors and strategic support to universities. Instructors of at least 2 universities together develop courses for joint international classes using digital media to communicate, collaborate, and document their working results. International Programs Digital aims at advancing the digitization of already successful internationally oriented master's programs and supports the universities in meeting the increased demand for digital study programs. When the pandemic unfolded, universities shifted to emergency remote teaching. From April to mid-May 2020, DAAD surveyed international offices in German higher education institutions. When asked to provide a forecast of the interest of their students in studying abroad in winter semester 2020-21, the assessment showed a pretty optimistic attitude. More than 1/3 of universities, 36%, assumed that students' interest will remain unchanged. Of course, by now we know more. It is clear studying abroad is severely limited and will be for quite some time. Hence, we must find other ways to continue international exchange and foster collaboration despite, or maybe especially because, of the global challenges. In summer 2020, DAAD surveyed nearly 400 DAAD-funded lecturers about the implementation of digital teaching during the worldwide corona crisis. When asked about the challenges of switching to virtual teaching, there are organizational and technical hurdles mentioned. Especially with regard to stable internet access, there's a big regional component to these numbers. But overall, the content creation and the support of the student in the learning process are named the main challenges. Nearly 80% are challenged by finding time to develop teaching learning materials for virtual teaching. 55% lack time to accompany students on their learning journey through digital support, a support that might look different from the support they look for in other learning scenarios. Asking about the learning elements and formats used in emergency virtual teaching, we find a vast majority has been digitizing lectures, either live or pre-recorded, while more innovative technological elements like AR/VR, game-based learning, or the use of social media are less widespread. Though peer and collaborative learning being the second most commonly mentioned format, at a little more than 1/3 using those elements, there's still room to grow. In October 2020, the DAAD invited the international and German higher education community to the virtual 2-day conference Moving Target Digitalization. Part of the conference were 30 workshops, 6 on each of the 5 topic clusters. Among the more than 1,000 participants, a vast majority was drawn to the topic Mobility and Exchange, Physical, Blended, Virtual. Throughout the entire event, the sessions in this cluster were continuously in high demand, attracting around 1/3 of the audience. DAAD knows about the challenges of implementing virtual teaching, also from our own programs. There's still a great deal of work to do, but there are also a large number of people dedicated to leveraging the potential of technology to rethink and find new ways of academic collaboration and exchange. What have we learned? The COVID pandemic and the shift to emergency remote teaching have triggered or accelerated many developments. There's a desire for exchange and discussion on challenges, inspiring practices, and ways to collaboratively create and share teaching and learning resources. Experimentation has increased awareness of the possibilities and added value of digitalization and has promoted the strategic integration of digital formats, structures, and initiatives in many contexts. Infrastructures are necessary but not sufficient for teaching, learning, and collaboration contexts. Mastering the necessary cultural change should be taken into account. Thank you for your attention. Next is Sara Custer, Associate Editor Curation at Times Higher Education, to look at some long-term predictions about the impact of the coronavirus on higher education from the THE University Leaders Survey.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Custer. I'm the Associate Editor for Curation here at Times Higher Education. And in this presentation, HE Leadership in Crisis, I'll be walking you through some of the findings from our University Leaders Survey taken earlier this year and some of the reflections that came from our Leadership and Management Summit earlier this month. So our University Leaders Survey was taken in May of this year, so it really got that good initial response the university leaders were feeling about this pandemic. We had over 200 responses from university leaders from over 50 countries, and we published the final results on timeshighereducation.com in June of this year. We asked university leaders about everything, about their initial response to the pandemic, but also what some of their long-term forecasting was. And of course, we asked them about to what extent they agreed that the experience of mass online teaching will increase their institution's offering of online degrees over the next 5 years. And as you can see, perhaps not surprisingly, many leaders right across the globe expected blended learning and to a certain extent fully online learning will be a permanent fixture of their university curriculum. University leaders told us that students will graduate with courses taken from at least 5 different international universities, all consisting of online education. They expect to see more customization of the learning to the student's need for flexibility of time and space. And they expect that actual course delivery will change. For large universities, it will become how a college can deliver high quality, differentiated learning at a lower cost. So one question that I'd like to put to the group for today's discussions is, to what extent will the pandemic result in innovative new models of online teaching and learning? This is something that we discuss on THE on a regular basis, and certainly something that we're exploring on THE campus, our new best practice knowledge sharing platform on online teaching and learning. And of course, we asked university leaders about international enrollments and to what extent they expect them to decline. As you can see here, university leaders in North America, Oceania, and MENA expected to see the biggest drops in international enrollments. But the reality was a bit different. In the US, clearinghouse data from October showed enrollments from overseas undergraduates dropped by almost 14%. But in the UK, universities defied pandemic forecasts and recruited a record 9% increase in students from recruited outside the UK and the EU. Meanwhile, in Australia, it's a bit of a mixed picture. Borders remain closed and international students studying on campus plummeted by about 84,000 or 1/6, but that was offset by a surge of 15,000 students studying offshore. And this reflects one of our findings from a THE student survey taken in October of this year that showed almost 50% of the respondents thought that online learning at an institution overseas would be a worthwhile experience. This suggests that those initial fears of declines in international student enrollments were perhaps a bit premature, as we're seeing now that international students are still willing to embark on international study, even if it means that a portion of it will be taken online. Of course, we asked university leaders about the viability of the university sector in general. Many of them, especially in North America and the UK, expect to see institutional bankruptcies, and all across the board, they expect to see a reduction in government investment, especially in research and science. They told us that corporations will become real competitors to universities. They expect to see a growth of mega universities, and they expect to see an increase in mergers, shared services, and federations. It's perhaps a bit too early to tell what the financial fallout is going to be of the pandemic, but this shows us in what mindset university leaders were whenever this all began. And finally, I'll leave you with this. These are some reflections from our Leadership and Management Summit earlier this month. And I think that they reflect a real shift in the way that university leaders are approaching their responsibilities now after living through a pandemic. Santa Ono, the president of the University of British Columbia, said that the next mental health crisis is already upon us, and universities must act swiftly to protect our students. Similarly, Freeman Rabowski commented on a campus compassion deficit, saying that the role of leadership is to encourage people and to say we can be better than we are. That means helping each other with their emotional, psychological state of being in this challenging time. So my final thought that I will leave with you before we start on today's discussions is to perhaps consider that the pandemic has presented university leaders with a new, more compassionate way of leading. Thank you very much.